Chapter 11. This is my name. AD 1179, 24th April.
You shall kill him!
But father!
Do not disobey me!
Behind the boy stood a towering figure, a shadow that only stood out from the darkness behind him with yellow piercing eyes and a slightly lighter black. This figure was standing in front of a boxing ring, in one corner of which was a small boy, hardly older than a handful of years. In the other, a person who actually looked like a simple man, but father had assured him that it was a criminal who deserved to be punished. However, this criminal was not in chains. He faced the boy freely and grinned at him.
If I make him dead,
he repeated what had gone before, as it was too good to be true.
Then you said I'm free, eh?
The shadow did not speak a word. He only made a waving motion with his hand for him to carry on.
I don't have a clue what's going on with your consecrated weirdos, but I won't let that slip through my fingers.
He stepped towards the boy and cracked his knuckles.
Sorry, kid. It's not personal.
The boy wanted to call for his father, but there the man already began to beat him. He threw himself on the ground, tried to hold his head between his arms as best as he could and pulled his legs to his chest and stomach.
Don't just let yourself get beaten up, you fool!
The shadow shouted and now had his hands clawed at the ropes of the boxing ring.
You are supposed to do your trick!
The boy cried in pain, but that didn't stop the man from punching and kicking him.
Do you want to die, you fool?
The shadow now roared.
I thought you wanted to protect Zangtor! Leave me alone!
It echoed in the child's mind. The pain was horrible. Why couldn't it just play outside like the others it sometimes saw from its room in the tower?
Leave me alone!
The cry grew stronger. Then the pain tore something inside him and gave way to a vast emptiness.
I told you to leave me in peace!
The man did not see it, but the shadow paid close attention. The child's blue-green eyes glowed violet for a moment, and all at once the blows had stopped. Now the man just stood there, staring at an indeterminate point somewhere in front of his feet. The shadow climbed into the ring and waved his hand in front of the man's eyes. No response. Then, with a flick of his wrist, he pushed him backwards. The man crashed to the ground like a statue, where he lay motionless.
Fascinating. Excellent.
The shadow commented. Now turning to the whimpering boy, he placed a hand on his shoulder and spoke empathetically.
You did it. You are not a disappointment.
The wanderer startled and just noticed the hand on his shoulder. It was that of the woman from...
What day is it today?
You slept through the whole of last day and night. Yesterday, then.
Didn't I tell you not to touch me?
I just wanted to help you. He looked down at himself. His hand reached into his belt pouch. And when he felt the smooth surface of something, he sighed in relief. He pulled out the object. It was a glass sphere resting on a copper base. Inside the glass sphere were two black dragons lying together around the hatchling, sheltering it in their midst. The hatchling itself was just struggling out of the egg and wore a piece of the shell like a small helmet on its head. All of them lay in a valley on a patch of grass surrounded by some pine trees and a stream. When he shook the ball, gold sparks trickled down, which, he thought, held up to the light looked like stars. Perhaps the dreams of some, or miracles that were to come true. The copper foundation, on the other hand, had a pattern, and at one point there were two curved pieces of brass. Surely, they were dragons, destructive beings seen by many as monsters. But in that sphere, there he saw more love than he had ever experienced from humans.
It's still there,
he whispered to himself. I have taken nothing from you, he heard the woman say in response. Swiftly he rose from the chamber. It was a cot made of hay that lay by the bed next to the boy. Before taking a few steps, he eyed the spot where he remembered seeing the boy last. After his eyes had adjusted to the darkness, he recognized him lying there apparently unchanged. I'm afraid his fever hasn't quite gone away yet.
He's tough. He'll get over it,
he replied curtly, then walked out the door. When he reached Azar, he asked him
what happened,
while he stroked the animal's brown muzzle. You were riding a little way, barely out of sight from here, when I saw you fall off your horse, the woman behind him replied. Again, he jerked around.
Stop sneaking up on me like that.
Why are you nagging at me all the time? I could have just left you there. She stepped towards him. He was a head taller than her, and somehow it amused him that she looked at his neck first, as if it were his eyes. But somehow she must have noticed that and now corrected her gaze upwards and actually looked at his face. You are very good when it comes to fighting, it seems to me. Now he had to smile. The way she defied him, he couldn't help thinking of Akira. To that you don't have to say anything anymore? Her voice was still irritated.
Sorry.
The woman jerked as if she had been lightly hit on the head with a rolled-up paper. What? She asked in response.
You heard me already, I won't say it again.
The Wanderer replied to her and carefully put the sphere which he had been holding in his left hand until now back into his belt pouch. He then walked a little way and stopped close to a birch tree on the path. His gaze was fixed on the city walls of Alaron. You carry something very dear to your heart, she commented.
My life?
She grinned. That's not what I meant. I do not know what it is. After all, I am blind. But I heard that you did not look first at your weapons. The Wanderer looked down at his swords, still attached to his belt. Only now did it occur to him that it must have been quite a bit of work for one person to track him back to the house with all that stuff. That says a lot about your character, if you like, she added.
And how would you know that? I could have just looked down at myself to see my weapons.
There she raised her finger and her grin widened. You have fallen into my trap, she said, while snapping her fingers. You see? You just admitted yourself that you didn't do it. And before you ask, I heard it just now in the tone of your voice. The Wanderer tilted his head and narrowed his gaze. This woman was treacherous. But was treacherous the right word? When you are blind all your life, you know, that's when you acquire other ways of seeing things. She beamed at him with a cheeky smile and crossed her hands behind her back.
That's not funny,
he grumbled. I also know that you know of Navatandril flowers. What an adventurer doesn't know about those?
At least those who do not intend to survive for a while longer than merely a few days.
Impressed?
I'm still deciding if it's that.
He looked into Asar's eyes, which returned his gaze faithfully. The animal snorted slightly at his touch. You have a loyal companion, he heard the woman say, also reaching out and patting the horse contentedly on the shoulder. Feels lovely.
Says you. He usually greets those who touch him like this and whom he does not know with a kick.
I guess I'm special then. She grinned again. With some exhaustion his gaze went from her to Asar, who snorted at him as if making fun of him. In return, the Wanderer countered it as if to say, how about a little less of that shit? It helped me bring you back.
Oh yeah?
He smirked.
How so?
It bit you by the hood and walked backwards back here. I guess that's how it thanks me for not just leaving you outside.
He does, huh?
The Wanderer looked at the stallion mockingly. It suddenly licked his face. With his lips puckered, the Wanderer now looked as if he had bitten something very sour.
Thanks,
he said curtly, and then wiped his face clean with his left hand. Over the next few days, the Wanderer learned that the woman was mostly self-sufficient, which involved a lot, not just the household, even taking care of the food. In late spring she was sowing seeds for all sorts, beans, peas, carrots, radishes, and parsnips, just to name a few. In the months before, she had already planted tomatoes and cabbage, and, to his positive surprise, the woman rarely ventured into town. Was she going to turn out to be just as shy of people? Another week passed, and now the boy was on his feet again, even if he still had difficulties moving his arm off the injured shoulder properly. He helped out here and there as much as he could, and he didn't want to be told otherwise about needing rest, but a few days later it was time for goodbyes. Do you really want to leave? The woman asked him, leaning against one of the two posts of the canopy in front of the entrance door. They were all standing outside together. The Wanderer had his arms folded in front of his chest as he did so. The world is calling me, the boy replied enthusiastically, hitting his chest once with his fist. Your friend there might feel comfortable here, and I don't have anything against this place, just, well, it's itching in my feet all the way to the toe. The woman smiled to herself when she heard the boy call the Wanderer her friend, and the latter said, But don't you forget that I won't be able to come and save you, little one. He grinned at these words. The boy grinned back and said, As if I needed to. I only had you put on a play so that you could win the lady's heart. Just like in the books.
Of course.
The boy threw his hand off at him. Oh, you don't believe me, and you still haven't stopped calling me little one. The other Wanderer stepped forward, stood directly in front of him and looked down at him. What are you doing? The boy asked, slightly irritated. Then he almost startled when the man suddenly took him in his arms and hugged him tightly. Let go of me, the boy finally said after a while, disengaging himself and slapping his chest and stomach as if he had gotten dirty in the process. What was that for? Now he pushed his head between his shoulders as the wanderer ruffled his hair with his right hand.
It's a dangerous world. Take care of yourself, big guy.
At these words, a bright smile began to spread on his lips. Mind if I take Azar with me?
Out of the question. Besides, he would probably just throw you off.
The boy couldn't believe that. But indeed, when he tried to mount him, Azar trotted a little aside, whinnying. The boy shook his head and just said that he would find an even better horse and show it to them, whereupon he and the woman laughed and the wanderer smirked. Afterwards, he said goodbye to the woman, who thanked him again for saving her, and he replied, Please, that's what the king pays me for. You will come and visit us, won't you? She asked cautiously. The boy nodded. You can count on it. Next time I'll bring a super-duper horse, and then we'll have a race, he said, addressing the last words to the wanderer, who nodded with a grin. They waved at him for a while until he finally disappeared into the evening forest. A few birds were still chirping when the woman turned to the wanderer and asked, Is he really a soldier of the consecrated blade?
No,
he admitted honestly.
But he has his heart in the right place, and if he should choose to serve the country in this way, then the king can count himself lucky.
It was then that he noticed when he felt a woman hugging his left arm. It ran down his back like icy drops of water. He carefully freed himself from her, whereupon she remarked, Allowing closeness is truly difficult for you, isn't it?
Perhaps.
And yet you embraced the boy?
How did you?
He looked at her closely, but her eyes stared as ever.
Sometimes I have the feeling that you are not really blind.
Oh, really blind I am not, she said, grinning broadly and folding her arms, leaning on the small of her back. It was the silence between the two sentences that gave it away, and then, of course, the What are you doing? Or let go of me. If you do not have the eyes to see, you will learn, as I said, to see another ways. He studied her, unable to hide the astonishment from his gaze. This was something, he thought to himself, that he could learn from her. It would certainly prove useful in survival and, if it came to it again, also in the fight against the consecrated blade. And suddenly another thought occurred to him. Would he be found here if he settled down? He jerked his head as if to throw a stupid thought out of his ear in one sweep, and banged the heel of his hand against his forehead. Have I unsettled you? The woman now asked him.
No, I was just, yes, closeness is hard for me.
He rolled his eyes.
Great distraction.
He thought to himself, already knowing he would regret it. I think we should start eating dinner, she finally said, making her way back inside first. Before the wanderer followed her, however, he took another look along the path the boy had taken. He knew only too well what the lad meant by the world calling him, but the child hadn't been on the run for years yet either, like he had. At some point, one's heart simply gets tired, even if the body is still bursting with youthful strength. But one thing was clear to him. The boy couldn't die. This world needed the lad. But it was unclear to him whether he was really that tired, and whether there was actually not a tiredness growing in him to stay too long on one spot.